Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's interactive Q&A, where we're going to talk about something that I'm sure has been a thorn in everyone's side as of late, which is the supply chain and the current issues that the supply chain for automation controls and hardware is suffering unprecedented sort of impacts right now. I'm sure that many of you have been dealing with these headaches as of late, and today we're going to talk about some of the strategies that Grantek uses to help mitigate some of these risks, and as well as some of the strategies that hopefully you guys can take home and implement to save yourself some headaches moving forward. Before we get into things, I just want to go over some interactive Q&A guidelines and tips that'll help you get the most out of today's session. First, try not to get distracted. Obviously, as most of us are working from home still, a lot of distractions out there. But if you can kind of put your Outlook on silent and silent your phone, I think you'll get a lot out of today's session. Second is to use the chat. So we want this session to be as interactive as possible. We're going to touch on some situations that we've encountered and some of the strategies that we use to overcome some of the risks that these situations pose. But we're definitely interested in hearing some of the specific scenarios that you out there might find yourself in, and maybe we can talk a little bit about how Grantek would handle those, or how we can get involved to help mitigate some of the schedule risks that this is causing you. Third, if there's anything that we covered today that you're interested in and maybe want to follow up on, feel free to take some notes or reach out to us afterwards, and we'll definitely provide you some more information. And the last is through this presentation, we have a few polls that we want to use to gather some information from you guys on some of the situations you're finding yourself in. And we'll use the answers to those polls to help kind of guide the conversation so you get the most out of it. All right, going over our agenda for today. First, I'll make some general introductions of myself and Grantek. The second thing we're going to touch on is the supply chain risks and the current supply chain issues that we're seeing out there right now. Third is talking about risk mitigators and some of the strategies that we here at Grantek use to reduce the negative impacts of the supply chain delays. We're also going to touch on critical spare assessments and some of our offerings that can help you avoid sort of negative situations and finding yourself where you have a failed component and can't get a replacement in the time you need it. And then fifth, we're just going to take some time to go over any questions and answer those as we can. All right, moving on here. Introductions. So today I am the presenter. My name is Logan Terry. I'm a client success manager here at Grantek. I've been with the company for about 6 years now, and I'm based in our office in British Columbia. I've spent time across many departments within Grantek, including our engineering department, our project management department, and now most recently in our client success department. So to kick things off, I just want to start with a bit of a poll question here, just relating to your experience out there with the current issues related to the supply chain for controls and automation hardware. So if you could go ahead and answer the polls. The couple of the 5 options are: no issues to date, small issues on past projects, but no real impacts to schedule as of yet, previous projects delayed or canceled due to supply chain, current issues causing project delays that are ongoing, or current issues that may have caused project cancellations. I'll give everyone a few minutes here to answer the poll, and then we'll go over the results. All right, I see some results flowing in here. Give it a few more seconds. All right. So kind of as I suspected, 80% of the audience responded that current issues are causing project delays currently, with 20% of the audience saying that there's been some small issues, but no real impacts to date. And this doesn't surprise me at all. Obviously, as we get through this, we'll introduce some of these risks for those who may not be familiar, but it sounds like the vast majority of you are well aware and are already dealing with some of the headaches that the supply chain is causing. Okay, moving on, we're going to talk now about our supply chain risk mitigation strategies, what these risks are, and how us here at Grantek provide risk mitigation for you. So as the poll would indicate, most of you are already familiar with the supply chain issues, but for those who may not be, common automation and controls hardware in the past would typically see lead times around 2 to 3 weeks in most cases. You may have seen specialty items with lead times beyond 2 to 3 months, but that was sort of non-typical. Today, supply chain issues, this has dramatically changed. Countless devices, VFDs, I/O modules, PLCs, network switches, servers, and even things as simple as like contact blocks. We're seeing lead times beyond 4 to 6 months, and with no real end in sight. We've seen lead times beyond 10 or 12 months now, unfortunately, for some hardware. All right. Oh, got a question come in here. Let's see here. All right. Does the question here, great question. Does Grantek have any experience with network and server hardware where lead times are currently beyond 12 months? Oh, definitely. Yeah, this is a very good question. Networking and server hardware, unfortunately, the supply chain has hit those product lines a little bit harder than some of the others. We've seen lead times for those types of devices beyond 12 months, beyond 13 months, and it's definitely causing huge delays. We definitely have some strategies that we've implemented to overcome this. On the network side, there are some sort of suggestions that we could make to evaluate different vendors. I don't know if you're handcuffed to a specific vendor like Cisco, but there are other options out there to suggest and make design alterations that you could potentially reduce lead times for. When it comes to server hardware, though, you have a few other options. Obviously, as the technology improves for cloud-based server and computing, we are seeing some of our clients switch to a cloud-based server infrastructure to avoid needing to wait on lead times for server hardware. I mean, if you're waiting on physical or on-prem solutions for your server hardware, typically you're waiting months for lead time, and then you're also waiting weeks or if not months for installation and commissioning. Cloud-based server infrastructure can get you up in a matter of days, and it's something that we're seeing a lot more of our clients adopt in recent history. Very good question. All right, moving on here. We have our next poll question, actually. So using the poll in the chat there, how many of you have upcoming projects with hardware requirements, and what is sort of the timeline for each of those? So if you have projects planned in Q3, but you've already ordered all your hardware, Q3 with no hardware ordered, and similar for Q4. All right, I'm seeing some answers coming in now. All right, so we have some diverse responses here, with 20% saying that they have Q3 projects planned, but all hardware is ordered or received. Another 20% with Q3 projects where hardware has not been ordered or received. And then 60% who have projects planned for Q4 with hardware not ordered or received yet. So we'll talk a little bit more about this in some of the next slides here, and how the current supply chain may impact those, and maybe how Grantek can help you navigate any risks that may pose. All right, so before we talk a little bit more about that poll response there, I wanted to talk about this iron triangle, where this terminology is widely used specifically within project management. Now, the iron triangle, obviously 3 sides, and they equate to schedule, budget, and quality. And the rule of thumb is typically you can't change one without impacting the other. So, for example, this would mean if your project was at risk for schedule delays and you wanted to get it back on track, you could typically spend a little bit more money or sacrifice a little bit of quality to get that back on track. With hardware lead times and the impacts from the supply chain, it's a completely different story. Obviously, if there's no stock available, paying more for it is not necessarily going to expedite your delivery. So it kind of poses this odd scenario where the stock is just not available, and sometimes delays are unavoidable. That being said, we'll go over some of the strategies that we use to overcome some of these, or to mitigate the risk completely. So this slide goes over Grantek strategies, and really there's 3 main strategies that we use to help reduce project risk, to reduce delays, to reduce cancellations, and just to reduce headaches overall with the procurement process. So the first risk mitigator that we use is, we just call it act early, order early. And it may seem a little obvious, but it's the best risk mitigator out there. The earlier you can get a design in place, the earlier you can get hardware ordered, the earlier you can execute a project. The second thing is our distribution network. So us here at Grantek, we've been in business for the last 40 plus years. And throughout those 40 years, we've been able to build very strong partners in the distribution network, or build our very strong distribution network that we can leverage. All of our distributor partners have different levels of stock available across North America. And oftentimes we can do that hard work for you by talking to many different partners and see how fast we can get your hardware, often reducing the overall lead time quite a bit. And the third thing that we'll focus on a little bit later is our predictive procurement strategy. And this is kind of multiple things rolled into one. But at the end of the day, really what it turns into is development of custom procurement strategies for our clients and partners based upon common consumption, upcoming projects. So we can develop a procurement list that you're going to need to keep your projects on track. The other thing we'll talk about is our commitment for maintaining a large volume of controls hardware that is commonly used within many different designs. And we'll talk about how we can leverage that to help you keep your projects on track. All right, so talking a little bit more about acting early. Obviously, us here at Grantek, the thing that we like to offer is preliminary electrical design services. By providing these design services, we allow our clients to get a high-level design in place, identify all of the long lead controls components and all the key components that you need to actually execute the project, and then work to get those same components on order. Obviously, this comes preliminary engineering services, doing a bulk of the design up front. It allows you to spend a little bit up front, reducing the remaining cost of the project execution. But what it really does is it streamlines the procurement phase for you, so you can really reduce the lead times, remove the lead time constraints, and execute a project when you want to. I see another question has come in here. All right, so the question asks, can you assist with reviewing our bill of materials and schedule to determine if we are at risk? And absolutely, I mean, this preliminary engineering offering, it doesn't just correlate to projects that haven't been initiated yet. It correlates to any project that you might be having issues with. If you're concerned about lead times on a specific project, definitely reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to review your bill of materials. We try to do our best to keep our finger on the pulse of the supply chain for all of our partners and vendors. And that allows us to very easily kind of indicate what components in your bill of materials might be at risk. Then we can also make suggestions for how potential design changes could allow you to avoid those risks. And yeah, so definitely, if you have any concerns about an upcoming project, feel free to reach out afterwards, and we can certainly help you through that. Great question, thank you. All right, moving on here. A little bit of latency on this slide, give me a second. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is our distribution network and how we leverage that here at Grantek to help our partners and our clients navigate the supply chain. So like I said, with 40 plus years of being in business, we've built a very wide, very diverse platform of partners that we can procure stock through. We utilize these relationships, one, to get fast pricing, fast lead time estimates, but also they keep us very well updated on changes, so we can dynamically react to any sort of changes to the current supply chain situation. We can leverage that network to reduce overall lead times, oftentimes keeping projects much better on track. The next thing is our partner diversity. So as mentioned, we have vast experience across many different hardware platforms. And this experience, both in-house and through our partners, allows us to evaluate designs and potentially make suggestions for in-kind replacements. And what that allows you to do is to allow your design to provide the same functionality with maybe a slightly different hardware platform. So you're not sacrificing any functionality, but you could drastically reduce the lead time that you're suffering or waiting on hardware for. And the next thing is our volume orders. So us here at Grantek, we do handle a large volume of controls and automation hardware each year. These volume orders can oftentimes be leveraged for additional warranty benefits, cash flow benefits, or expedited lead times. right, moving on here. So the third thing I want to talk about here is our predictive procurement strategy. Now, our predictive procurement strategy, like I said, has a couple of different pieces worked into it. But first and foremost, it involves a continuous review of our clients' planned and scheduled projects. This allows us to very easily identify any at-risk components, and it feeds directly into a customized predictive procurement strategy for each client. This is tailor-made for each client's upcoming projects or their spare parts requirements or their consumption of general components throughout production. These documents can provide either a short-term outlook on what you might need coming up maybe before the end of this year, or longer term, maybe over the next 3 or 5 years if needed. Now, the second component is our commitment to maintaining a large volume of in-stock common controls and automation hardware. Now, this stock that we'll be maintaining is it's evaluated based on all of our upcoming jobs, what we see is going to be needed for each of our clients moving forward. Evaluated to determine which components are at the highest risk, so we can bring those in, make sure that we have some available when our clients need it. And then this feeds directly into our earlier comment on preliminary engineering services. So this is oftentimes required, one, to not only evaluate if the project is at risk, but two, we can also evaluate what components are required and try to determine maybe if the design can be slightly modified to suggest in-kind replacements for some of the hardware that we might have in stock or maybe that you have in stock already. This results in a huge mitigation of the lead time risks, oftentimes allowing you to keep your projects on track. All right, moving on to the next slide, we have another poll question here. So the poll question is, are you confident that you have all spare parts for all production critical automation devices within your facility? So the four options, one is you're confident that you have everything you need on hand. Two, you may have on-hand spares, but maybe not for all components. Three, you have no spare parts on hand, but you completely rely on distributors for maintaining stock levels of those. Or four, you're not really sure what spare parts you have on hand. Give everyone a couple of minutes for the answers to flow in. All right, we see some responses coming in. I'll give everyone a couple more seconds here. All right, so some diverse answers again here. We'll see, we have 40% who say they have on-hand spares for most components, but maybe not all. 20% who have no spare parts on hand and are relying on distributors, and 40% who are unsure of their current spare parts status. And this is very common across the industry, and I feel it hasn't really been of huge concern up until late when now that the supply chain issues are getting so bad. In the past, maybe when lead times were less than a couple of weeks for most components, it might not be so bad if you have a VFD that has failed, and you can afford to wait for the spare to be delivered. Today, when we're seeing lead times 6 months and beyond, obviously that impact becomes a lot more drastic. So because of that, we're going to talk about Grantek's next offering, which is our critical spare assessments. And really, as I mentioned, this is an assessment done by Grantek to ensure that you have all the critical spare parts on hand that you need to keep your operations running. Nobody wants to be waiting for 4, 6, or more months for a production critical component. You want to get those resolved as quickly as possible, and often the quickest way to do that is to have the spare on hand for replacement. So what we do is we offer comprehensive on-site reviews of your facility's entire control system, and out of that we're able to generate an asset list. This asset list then we can compare with all of the spare parts you have on hand. By performing a gap analysis, then we can put together a report that outlines the suggested procurement list for all of your at-risk hardware. So if you maybe have a couple of components out there that you have no spare parts for, you might want to consider purchasing them now if they have 6-month lead time before something happens and you really need it. Grantek can also help you with the procurement of those suggested components. Now, Procurement, especially in today's day and age, is definitely a painful process. It's difficult to keep on top of your distributors to make sure that if there are lead time changes or delivery estimate changes, that you know of those as soon as they happen, so you can adjust your plans accordingly. Grantek can kind of help take that process out of your hands to allow you to focus on higher priorities. But the third thing of this that allows you to do, and I think this is a very valuable output of this activity, which is it allows you to generate a modernization roadmap quite easily for your facility. So once we understand what components you have in your control system, we can pretty easily identify any at-risk or obsolete components that you may or may not be able to find spares for. Often people have older control systems where the only place you can really get a spare part for is off something like eBay, where who knows what price you'll be paying, and if it's even available. So putting a roadmap together to show how a modernization sort of action plan would look for your facility is an easy output from these on-site controls assessments. I see another question come in here. All right, so it says, what actions can we take if we have to replace a failed component, i.e. a panel view, and lead times are too long to wait? Definitely a great question. It's one that we get a lot of lately. Many clients reach out with news that they've had a production critical device fail and the lead times are 3 or 4 months, and they need other options to get things back on track. Now there are a few options, and maybe I'll talk specifically about this request for an HMI, and this one I believe was mentioned, it was a panel view. So and oddly enough, we've seen this more often lately because panel view lead times are very long right now. So one thing that we've done is again suggesting alternative or in-kind replacements. For a panel view specifically, one thing we have designed is replacing the panel view in total with an industrial PC and an associated touchscreen monitor, panel-mounted monitor. And what that allows you to do is install software and license the IPC accordingly to basically mimic the panel view. So the same application can be downloaded to it, but the lead times on IPCs and touchscreen monitors are far less than that of a panel view. Some of the other strategies that we could use there for components in general is evaluating refurbished hardware. So there are many distributors out in our distribution network that they sell refurbished hardware. That's their business. So they'll bring in hardware over stock and they'll make sure that it's in good working condition, and they resell that with a warranty that they provide. And oftentimes, if that's your only option, that's the best option. So, and we work with a lot of them, and we do help our clients out by getting hardware that you can't find anywhere else through these vendors. So if that's a situation that you're finding yourself in, definitely feel free to reach out, and we can talk about this a little bit further, maybe see how we could get involved to help. All right. So moving on here. We're actually just going to summarize things here, and just to everyone who's participating right now, please, we want this to be a very interactive session. So if you have any scenario-specific questions other than those we've received already, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we can talk about them in a little bit more detail. But really, I just want to summarize, like Grantek, we are here to help, and we can help with the things listed here. So if you have any concerns about hardware lead times, definitely reach out and we can talk about them specifically. We can talk how we can apply our strategies to help you mitigate the risks associated with it. If you have projects at risk or already suffering from delays, like our first poll question would suggest, some people are already seeing these delays. Reach out, let us know what your situation is. We can evaluate and see how we can maybe expedite things for you. It's challenging right now if we really think about where the lead time situations are at, being 6 or more months for certain components. People who have projects planned for summer shutdowns or even the Christmas holiday shutdowns, they're already at risk. So if you're concerned about that or you're just unsure, feel free to reach out and we can talk through it and make sure that we keep your projects on schedule. We want our clients to be able to execute projects when they want to and not just when they get the hardware. we've seen it a lot. So if it's something you just want some more information on, please reach out. And then the last thing, as covered by our critical spares assessment, we can be there to make sure that you have the right spares on hand in case of critical failure. Like I mentioned, nobody wants to be waiting more time than they have to replace a component that's keeping your line from running at your facility. So reach out. We can talk about how we can get in, do an assessment, do that gap analysis, and make sure you have all the spare parts on hand that you need. All right. So if anybody gets any takeaways from this, you know, we moved through things pretty quickly. Like I said, if you have any last minute comments, feel free to drop them in the chat. But takeaways, we're here to help with any questions you have, or supply chain or else. Feel free to reach out. Our first and best risk mitigator, like I mentioned, act early and order early. We can help with preliminary engineering to make sure you get a design in place so you can get the hardware ordered as quickly as possible. And really, just one of the most important things of all of this, we just want everyone to understand what the impact is of the supply chain right now. We don't want anybody to find themselves in a situation where you're seeing schedule delays when they could have been mitigated earlier in the process. There's a lot of resources available from the different platforms. So Rockwell has a specific website that they keep updated to keep everyone in the loop with what their current lead times are. Very similar for all the other controls platforms. Take a look and make sure you're familiar with it. And if you're not familiar with where to find that information, feel free to reach out and we can get you up to speed. The fourth thing, have the hardware you need before you need it. This goes back to our critical spare assessments. Making sure you have all the spares on hand is before you need it is the best case scenario. And the fifth thing is evaluating in-kind replacements. So like I mentioned earlier, there's often design changes that can be made without sacrificing functionality that'll reduce the lead times for a project if you have one coming up. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. I'll stay on a little bit here to see if there's any other questions that trickle in. But thank you all very much for participating in this and listening. Thanks to those of you who dropped questions in. Great questions. If you want some additional detail, feel free to reach out. Or for just general inquiries, feel free to reach out to us at info@grantek.com. And for those of you registered, you will be receiving a recording of the event. And yeah, feel free to reach out with any other questions. Thanks again for your time. I hope to hear from some of you soon.